My family booked an $8,500 seafood and caviar spread to celebrate our reconciliation after 5 years of no contact. When the manager opened the door to the private dining room, I did not see a quiet table for three. I saw 36 relatives eagerly tearing into lobsters and chugging $500 bottles of champagne. My father smiled, wiped a smear of garlic butter from his chin, and loudly ordered me to hand my black card to the server. I simply and calmly called the manager over, whispered exactly 3 sentences, then turned on my heel and walked out the door. 40 minutes later, my brother-in-law texted in a panic that the police were locking the restaurant doors and threatening to arrest my father. Before I tell you how I systematically dismantled my family's entire fake empire, let me know where you are listening to this story from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you have also had to walk away without looking back to teach toxic people who holds the real power. I am Camille. I am 35 years old. I am the founder and CEO of a premier private financial intelligence and forensic accounting firm on the East Coast. My job is to track dirty money, decode shady financial networks, and expose the hidden wealth of the ultra-rich. I work with federal agencies, massive hedge funds, and multinational corporations. My brain is trained to see through every lie, spot every anomaly on financial statements, and smell traps from miles away. But family always has an incredibly cruel way of clouding your judgment. They know exactly which buttons to push because they are the ones who installed them. For the past 5 years, I have maintained a strict no-contact policy with my parents, Warren and Brenda. 5 years of absolute peace. 5 years for me to build my empire from an old laptop on a cramped kitchen table into a lavish top-floor office with a view sweeping the entire city skyline. I single-handedly created a life that no one could interfere with, no one could control, and no one could strip away. So when Brenda left a tearful voicemail last week, begging for a small quiet family dinner to heal the wounds of the past, a tiny and foolish part of me believed her. A small part of the child who always craved unconditional love overruled the acumen of an auditing expert. The sweltering heat of the evening clung to my skin as my private driver opened the door of the smooth Maybach at the entrance of Laura. Laura is a private dining club notorious for its exclusivity, where reservations take months and menu prices are never printed in concrete numbers. I was wearing a bespoke Tom Ford suit, donning the most perfect armor to face the people who had spent my entire childhood making me feel like an outsider in my own home. I stepped through the heavy mahogany doors, taking a deep breath. I had braced myself to see my parents tucked away in a hidden corner, tense and ready to apologize for a lifetime of love, full of harsh conditions. The hostess smiled radiantly, recognizing me instantly. She knew me not only as an elite guest, but also knew the deeper secrets of my position in this place. She led me through the magnificent main dining room, walking down a narrow corridor, dimly lit by crystal chandeliers, flanked by vintage wine cellars worth millions of dollars. She stopped in front of the intricately carved wooden double doors of the VIP dining room. As she pushed the doors open, the sound hit my face like a physical punch. It was not a quiet table for three, it was a chaotic, loud, and ostentatious party of 36 extended family members. I stood frozen at the threshold, aunts I had not seen since college, cousins who only called me when they needed bail money to get out of holding cells, church ladies who had whispered vicious rumors about my perpetual lack of a decent husband. All of them were crowding around a long table draped in pristine white silk, sparkling under the crystal lights. The scene before my eyes was a perfect testament to sheer greed. The table was drowning in the ruins of a ridiculously extravagant feast. 4 colossal 3-tier seafood towers had been picked clean, leaving only oyster shells, crab claws, and empty caviar tins scattered across the melting ice. Prime bone-in Wagyu steak sat dominantly on expensive porcelain plates, stained with glistening streaks of fat. At least 8 empty bottles of Cristal champagne were shoved toward the center of the table. They had been here for hours, eating and drinking with the recklessness of people who never had to worry about footing the bill. At the center position of the table was none other than my father, Warren. He was wearing a suit that looked at least a decade out of date, sitting imperiously like a king who had just conquered a kingdom he had put no effort into building. He caught my eye as I stood at the threshold. The boisterous conversation around the table slowly died down as 36 pairs of eyes simultaneously turned in my direction. There was not a single ounce of warmth in their gazes. Only cold calculation and a sickening sense of entitlement. Warren did not stand up to greet me, he did not say he missed me. Instead, he casually picked up a silk napkin, wiped a smear of garlic butter from his chin, and flashed a smile that made my stomach churn. "Look who finally decided to show up," Warren declared. His voice boomed, deliberately so everyone in the room could hear. "Hand your black card to the server, Camille. You are treating the whole family tonight, right? It is the least you can do after abandoning us for 5 whole years." The sheer audacity of that demand hung in the thick air. I shifted my gaze to my mother, Brenda, sitting right next to him. She offered a weak, placating smile, her hand constantly adjusting the cheap pearl necklace around her neck. She was the one who had orchestrated this charade. She had used the promise of a mother-daughter reconciliation to fund a lavish family gathering that she and Warren could never afford to pay for themselves. They wanted to play rich in front of their church friends, and I was expected to be a blind ATM for them to withdraw from. Before I could even process this cruel betrayal, my sister, Jasmine, chimed in. Jasmine had always been the undisputed golden child of the family, the one who never had to hear the word no. She was the one donning an expensive designer dress, something I was certain she had swiped on a credit card she could never afford to pay off. She smirked over the rim of her champagne glass, resetting our entire toxic history in just a single breath. "Don't be so stingy, Cammy," Jasmine said, her hand leisurely swirling the pale yellow liquid in her glass. "Trent and I just closed the deal on our new yacht, and Malik is unemployed again. You sit in your fancy downtown office all day, doing some desk jockey inspector job with the government, with no husband and no kids to worry about. It is time you paid back the family that raised you." Trent, her white husband, leaned back in his chair with an unconcealed look of smugness. He worked as a middle manager at a financial hedge fund, and always carried an unwarranted arrogance that constantly made me nauseous. He loved using microaggressions and veiled racist remarks, disguised as compliments, to mask his deep-seated insecurities about my financial superiority. He had no idea I owned an independent financial intelligence firm. He thought I was just a civil servant enjoying perks, thanks to diversity quotas. "That's right, Camille," Trent chimed in, lazily waving his fork around. "Share the wealth. We all know those diversity contracts at your agency pay very handsomely. You can absolutely cover this family dinner." I shifted my gaze to Malik, my impulsive and irresponsible older brother. He was trying to shove a massive lobster tail into his mouth while trying to avoid my eyes. Malik, the one who owed $20,000 to underground betting rings. Malik, the one who was always shielded by Warren and Brenda from any consequences of his stupid decisions. They wanted me to pay for this insane feast, while they openly mocked my life, my business, and my independence. Brenda finally spoke up. Her voice carried that familiar, manipulative tone she always used whenever she wanted to coerce someone into bending to her will. "Don't make a fuss, Camille, we are family. Family must take care of each other. You have been blessed with so much. And God expects you to share those blessings with the people who put a roof over your head." Put a roof over my head. I genuinely wanted to laugh out loud. I remembered my teenage years, when I had to work double shifts at a dingy diner just to buy my own school clothes, because Warren was always whining that money was tight. Yet, at the exact same time, he was splashing cash to fund Jasmine's expensive cheerleading camps. I remembered the cruel lessons about discipline that Warren claimed he was teaching me by charging me rent the exact month I turned 18. Meanwhile, Malik was allowed to hole up in the basement rent-free until well into his late 20s. They never nurtured my success, they only ever lay in wait to siphon it. They sat there, chewing on steaks worth hundreds of dollars, waiting for a single successful black woman to crumble under the pressure of family guilt. They expected me to shrink down, to obediently hand over my credit card, to avoid humiliating them in front of their relatives and the church elders. They thought my craving for their love was stronger than my own self-respect. But they were wrong, a profound and fatal mistake. I did not argue, I did not raise my voice or shed a single tear. I did not justify my existence or defend the empire that I had built with my own blood, sweat, and long sleepless nights. I simply stood motionless. My posture radiated a kind of absolute authority that they would never be able to comprehend. I gently raised 2 fingers into the air. Instantly, the club's senior manager, who had been standing anxiously waiting in the corner, rushed toward me. He recognized me as more than just a wealthy client. He knew exactly who I was and the true level of power I held in this place. I leaned slightly toward him, ensuring my voice was kept exceptionally low, composed, and completely out of earshot of the grinning crowd at that table. I whispered exactly 3 sentences into his ear. I am the silent majority shareholder of the real estate group leasing the premises to this club. Comp my glass of sparkling water and drop this Adol's $500 bill straight into the lap of the man sitting at the head of the table. If they cannot pay this amount in full, lock the doors and call the Atlanta Police Department immediately. The manager's eyes widened for a quarter of a second before he gave a crisp and professional nod. He understood exactly what needed to be done. I shifted my attention back to the crowded long table. Warren was still smirking, his hand outstretched, waiting for me to pull out my wallet. Jasmine was whispering something to Trent, both of them looking at me with thinly veiled contempt. I calmly smoothed the lapels of my jacket, flashing a hollow and perfectly polished smile. "Enjoy the rest of the evening, everyone," I declared, my voice echoing clearly over the clinking of cutlery. "I am just stepping out to touch up my lipstick. I will be right back." I turned on my heel and walked out of the private dining room. I did not run. I glided down the lavish hallway, past the hostess stand, and straight out the heavy front doors into the sweltering Atlanta night air. I handed the doorman a crisp $100 bill, slid into the plush leather seat in the back of the waiting Maybach, and asked the driver to take me home. The ride back to my exclusive gated penthouse was incredibly peaceful. I watched the bright city lights blur past the tinted windows, feeling an immense sense of relief. For the past 5 years, a guilty part of me had wondered if cutting contact with them was too harsh a reaction to their toxicity. Tonight they gave me the absolute validation I needed. They did not invite me to make peace, they invited me to make me pay. 40 minutes later, I was sitting on the velvet sofa in my penthouse living room, sipping a freshly brewed macchiato, when the explosion finally happened. My phone, which had been silent all evening, suddenly lit up like a fireworks display. I calmly watched the notifications continuously pile up on the screen, a cascade of relentless panic. 14 missed calls from Warren, 8 missed calls from Brenda, dozens of frantic, misspelled text messages from cousins, screaming to know where I had gone. The brutal reality of the Adol $500 bill had clearly landed on the dining table. I slowly scrolled through the messages, leisurely savoring the sheer terror radiating from the digital screen. Warren's texts swung dizzily from commanding arrogance to absolute panic. "Get back here right now. They aren't letting us leave." "Camille, this is not funny. The manager is threatening to call the police. You must pay for this immediately." Brenda's texts were a masterclass in psychological manipulation, dripping with desperate guilt trips. "How could you do this to your own parents? Aunt Denise is sobbing. Our cards do not have enough limit to cover this amount. Please come back, we will pay you back, I promise. Fix this, Camille." I did not answer a single message. I simply took another sip of coffee, leaving them to drown in the consequences of their own gluttony. They had deliberately ordered imported lobster and caviar. They had demanded the most premium Wagyu beef. They had gloatingly enjoyed the expensive bottles of wine. Now, they could find their own way to digest that bill without my black card to save them. Then an extremely hostile message notification chimed. It was from Trent, my arrogant brother-in-law. The man who had mocked my work contracts less than an hour ago was now completely losing his mind in the group chat. "You sick psychopath," Trent wrote, the digital words practically vibrating with rage. The police are walking through the front doors of the restaurant right now. The manager actually called them. They are threatening to arrest Warren for theft of services. You must pay this bill over the phone, this very second, or I swear I will destroy your pathetic government job tomorrow morning. I will call the press. You messed with the wrong person, Camille. I will ruin you. I stared at his threat, a slow and extremely dangerous smile spreading across my lips. Trent thought he was dealing with a weak, emotional woman who would crumble the moment a man in a suit raised his voice to threaten her. He had absolutely no idea who he was talking to. He failed to realize that he was threatening a financial intelligence and audit expert who made a living exposing dirty secrets and destroying powerful, wealthy men far more dangerous than a mid-level financial manager. I placed my coffee cup down on the glass table. I picked up my phone, my fingers gliding quickly across the digital keyboard. I did not explain, I did not apologize, I only typed my first and only response of the night, sending it directly to the group chat to ensure every family member would see it. I suggest you double-check your investment fund's internal compliance records before you dare threaten my business. Trent, good luck with the police. I hit send, switched the phone to silent mode, and tossed it aside on the velvet sofa. The trap had been perfectly set. The illusion of their family wealth had been publicly shattered beyond repair. But I knew this was only the prelude. The real war to protect my peace and my empire had just begun. The next morning, the sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of my home office. I stood in the kitchen, draped in a silk robe, calmly watching the city of Atlanta wake up. My espresso machine hummed softly, a sound in stark contrast to the aggressive, violent buzzing of the phone on the marble kitchen island. I opened social media. My younger sister Jasmine had not wasted a single moment. While Warren and Brenda were likely still hyperventilating over the legal and financial troubles of last night's restaurant bill, Jasmine had immediately weaponized the only asset she had, her online following. She had always deluded herself into being a lifestyle influencer, possessing a following built on the carefully orchestrated fantasy of a wealthy, perfect and devout Southern family. Now she was using that platform to launch a full-scale digital attack. The video, posted at 6 in the morning, was meticulously staged and used color filters to project maximum vulnerability. Jasmine sat on the floor of her unnecessarily massive suburban house, wearing an oversized neutral sweater. Her hair was in a messy bun, and her makeup was deliberately smudged to look as if she had been crying for hours. She had even set up a soft ring light to perfectly capture the fake tears falling down. I pressed play, watching her face twist into an expression of utter agony. I never thought I would have to make a video like this, Jasmine began, her voice trembling with rehearsed precision. But my heart is truly shattered this morning. Last night, my sister, Camille, committed an unbelievably cruel act against our family, against our elderly parents. I took a sip of coffee, marveling at her sheer audacity. Warren and Brenda were only in their early 60s, regularly played tennis, and had plenty of energy to host extravagant social events. Yet Jasmine suddenly painted them as frail and helpless victims. We invited her to a beautiful family dinner to heal old wounds, Jasmine continued, wiping away a strategic tear from her cheek. We only wanted to love her, but instead, she tricked us into an incredibly expensive restaurant, ordered thousands of dollars in food and wine to flaunt her wealth, and then she vanished. She abandoned us. She left our elderly parents stranded with a bill they could not pay, completely humiliating them in front of the entire family. This is financial abuse. This is elder abuse. Jasmine leaned closer to the camera, her voice dropping into a dramatic whisper. Camille has become so obsessed with her monies, so consumed by her corporate status, that she has completely forgotten where she came from. She wanted to see our father arrested. She wanted to ruin us. Please pray for my family today. Pray for Camille that God softens her bitter, hardened heart. The video faded to black. I sat motionless, analyzing this performance not as a sister, but as a professional. It was a textbook manipulation tactic. She hit all the exact emotional trigger points. She conveniently omitted the truth that they had ambushed me. that they had ordered expensive champagne long before I arrived, and that they had publicly demanded I pay. I did not need to be angry. Anger is an undisciplined emotion. I opened the encrypted vault on my personal server. Inside was a folder I had created 7 years ago, labeled simply with Warren's initials. I clicked open a specific document that had been waiting patiently for this exact moment. It was a complete, uncensored financial ledger from the regional bank that Warren had used for decades. 7 years ago, I sat in the cramped financial aid office at my university, a desperate student being informed that my savings account and tuition trust fund were completely empty. $100, $1,000, the money I had painstakingly contributed from my part-time jobs, along with the college fund my late grandmother had left me, had vanished. When I confronted Warren, he did not even flinch. He told me that the family was struggling and needed liquidity to survive. He told me to go get student loans myself, insisting that carrying debt would build character. 2 months later, Jasmine married Trent in an extravagant $80,000 reception at the country club. There were imported peonies covering every surface, massive ice sculptures, and a premium gourmet dinner. I ate my dry chicken at table 12 and forced a smile. But the following week, when Warren asked me to help organize his tax documents, I found the wire transfer slips. He had not used my money to save the family from collapse. He had transferred the exact balance from my education fund directly to the event management department of the Oak Creek Country Club. He had sold out my future to buy Jasmine a party to show off to Trent's wealthy parents. I did not scream or cry when I found those documents. I quietly scanned them, saved the routing numbers, captured Warren's signature authorizing the transfer, and locked that data file away. I knew even then that the day of reckoning would come. I attached this single data file to a new email. I left the body of the email completely blank. The subject line simply read, Oak Creek Country Club Ledger. I typed in Jasmine's email address and hit send. I waited exactly 60 seconds to ensure the email had hit her server. Then, I picked up my phone and dialed her number. She answered on the second ring, Camille. She sighed dramatically, her tone dripping with absolute condescension. I really do not want to hear your excuses right now. The family is in turmoil because of your selfish behavior last night. Dad is heartbroken, Trent is talking to a lawyer, everyone needs to know the truth about who you really are. I did not raise my voice, I spoke with the sharp, emotionless precision of an ice blade. Open your email, Jasmine. She paused, clearly unnerved by my absolute composure. What? I don't have time to play games with you, Camille. You need to apologize to Mom and Dad right now and pay that bill. I said, open your email, I repeated, my voice radiating pure cold authority. I will wait. I heard the rapid clicking of her laptop keyboard. A few seconds passed in absolute silence, then I heard a sharp, sudden intake of breath. It was the distinct sound of a woman watching her entire fabricated reality crumble. The document you are looking at is a bank transfer ledger from 7 years ago, I told her. It details the exact moment Warren drained $100, $1,000 from my college trust fund and wired it directly to the Oak Creek Country Club to fund your extravagant dream wedding. The wedding that solidified your upper-class social standing with Trent's wealthy friends. Camille, where did you get this? She stammered, panic making her voice pitch up. Dad said he paid for the wedding from his investments. You are lying. It has the bank's official watermark and Warren's physical signature authorizing the transfer. I replied smoothly. You can try to play the ignorant victim, Jasmine, but Trent's golfing buddies and your sorority sisters won't care what Warren told you. All they will see is that the high society life you constantly flaunt was subsidized by the stolen tuition fund of your own biological sister. Jasmine began to hyperventilate. She understood that if Trent's family, who came from old money, discovered her fairy tale wedding was funded by stolen money, she would be permanently exiled from their high society. Cammy, please, she begged, her words breaking in half as real tears finally began to fall. You cannot show this to Trent. The club board will destroy me, please. I swear I didn't know he took your money. You have exactly 5 minutes, I commanded. Take that video down, delete every post, every comment, every tear-soaked lie you published this morning. If that video still exists at the 5-minute and 1-second mark, I will hit send on a mass email containing this ledger to Trent's managing partner, the president of Oak Creek Country Club, and every single person who attended your fraudulent wedding. I hung up. Less than 3 minutes later, the video vanished. Her entire social media account was switched to private. The golden child was permanently silenced. The satisfaction was fleeting, interrupted by the shrill ring from my private office line. The screens displayed the main switchboard number of Sterling and Vance Wealth Management. Trent. I let the phone ring exactly 3 times, allowing his blood pressure to spike a little before picking up. I did not say a word, I merely breathed into the receiver. Listen to me very carefully. Camille, Trent roared, his voice trembling with a toxic mixture of panic and arrogance. I don't know what kind of sick forged document you just sent my wife, but she is currently locked in the bathroom having a massive panic attack. You have completely lost your mind. Trent took my silence for submission and immediately pressed his imagined advantage. You think you're so smart? Trent sneered, his suave aristocratic veneer completely peeling away. You earn a few government paychecks, and suddenly you think you can play with the real men. You are a diversity hire with a massive ego. You have absolutely no concept of how real wealth operates. I set my gold pen down on the desk. A soft, slow, and dark laugh bubbled up from the back of my throat. Real wealth, Trent? I asked, keeping my voice soft and emotionless. Is that why the Federal Financial Intelligence Agency just appointed my firm at exactly 6 o'clock this morning to handle a massive internal embezzlement investigation? I asked, enunciating every syllable sharply. A scandal involving a white fund manager who just bought a yacht that he absolutely could not afford on his base salary. A dead silence enveloped the line. I drove the blade in deeper, twisting it with the precision of a professional. You see, Trent, when the SEC discovered that someone had been siphoning client funds through offshore shell companies over the past 14 months, they panicked, and while I was sipping my morning espresso, I started reviewing the transaction history of that rogue employee. And what did I find, Trent? I found $340,000 funneled into a shell company. I found a wire transfer for a yacht down payment, and ironically, I found a frantic, desperate voicemail from that very same employee threatening to destroy my firm, all over a restaurant bill. I'm sorry, Trent whined. The arrogant executive from just 2 minutes ago had entirely vanished, replaced by a man staring into the abyss of federal prison. Camille, please listen to me. I can pay the money back. I will have Jasmine call and beg for your forgiveness on her knees. Your reputation is an illusion funded by stolen money, I declared coldly. Exactly like your wedding, exactly like your yacht, you and Jasmine were made for each other. Trent, you are both empty vessels parading around in stolen luxury. Camille, I beg you, he sobbed. Look out your glass wall, Trent, I ordered. Do you see the FBI agents stepping out of the elevator in their cheap federal suits? They are not there to discuss your quarterly revenue forecasts. They are there to escort you out of the building in handcuffs. No, Trent moaned, the sound dissolving into primal panic. They are walking toward my door, help me. Enjoy your new reality, Trent. I hit the button to end the call, but my work was not yet finished. At exactly 8:15 the next morning, the private security alarm in my house went off. Marcus, my head of security, reported over the radio that Warren's silver Lexus had tailgated through the checkpoint. I told Marcus to open the main gates, letting them drive straight into my driveway. I would deal with these pests myself. The silver Lexus roared up the private road, slamming on the brakes just inches from the edge of my lawn. The car doors flew open. Brenda lunged out. You owe us. Brenda screamed, her shrill voice echoing. You owe this family everything. We kept a roof over your head. You wouldn't have that damn firm if your father hadn't taught you discipline by charging you rent while you lived under our roof. Warren stepped out, brandishing a messy stack of papers. This is a lawsuit for breach of fiduciary duty, Warren bellowed. You built your company using family resources. That makes it a family trust. I demand that you immediately transfer 30% of the company's shares to my control. That money will be enough to bail out Trent and pay off Malik's debts. Sign here, or I will freeze your entire operation. I didn't flinch, you charged me rent. I spoke up, my sharp voice slicing through the damp morning air. You charged a 16-year-old girl $600 a month to sleep in the exact bed she grew up in. All while Malik was driving around crashing cars, and Jasmine was taking elite dance classes. You didn't teach me discipline, Brenda. You taught me how to survive under extortion. And you taught me how to protect my assets from thieves. I reached out and slapped the stack of papers hard out of Warren's hands. The legal documents printed from the internet fluttered all over the driveway. His jaw dropped. Before he could yell, I held up a thick black folder. I didn't use a single penny of yours to build my firm, Warren. But we do need to talk about fiduciary duty and family trusts. Because 3 years ago, you made a catastrophic mistake. 3 years ago, I continued, stepping closer to him, you convinced the church to back your delusional commercial real estate project. You poured money into high-risk commercial leases. You leveraged the church's assets to the breaking point to fund your own lifestyle. And then the market turned. You were facing 20 years in federal prison for fraud and embezzlement. Warren stumbled back a step, and then a miracle occurred. An anonymous private equity fund out of Delaware stepped in. They bought out your debt. They restructured your loans. They allowed you to keep your house, your cars, and your position at the church, on the condition that you met a strict monthly repayment schedule. You thanked God for that nameless investment fund. I opened the black folder. I pulled out the original deed to his sprawling suburban mansion, the title deeds to the luxury cars they were driving, and the master promissory note bearing his frantic signature. That wasn't a stranger, Warren, I whispered. That was my shell company. I bought your debt. I bought your fraudulent loans. The devastation that fell upon them was biblical. Warren's knees buckled. He had to grab the side of the Lexus to keep from collapsing. Brenda let out a thin, piercing shriek, covering her mouth with both hands. You don't own 30% of my company, Warren, I declared. I own 100% of your house, your cars, and the very concrete you are standing on. You have been paying me rent for the past 3 years. Warren slid down the side of the car, completely defeated. If you ever dare to threaten me again, I will call in the entire debt immediately. You will be kicked out of my house by this weekend. Get off my property, I commanded, turning my back to them. And make sure my rent check is mailed on time by the 1st of the month. A few days later, a pinnacle event of delusion took place. Despite Trent wearing a federal ankle monitor and Warren facing eviction, they still insisted on hosting their 40th wedding anniversary gala at the Grand Piedmont Country Club. They thought that if they maintained the facade, I would back down. I walked into the massive ballroom, draped in an impeccably tailored emerald silk gown. The entire room fell dead silent. Warren stood at the podium. He launched into a humiliating speech, aimed squarely at me. He called me a loner, a bitter woman who chose money over family, someone with no husband or children to share her wealth. He ordered me, in front of 200 elite guests, to forgive the debt, save Trent, and protect the family's good name. He waited for the shame to crush me. I didn't blink. I delicately raised my crystal champagne flute, tipping it slightly in a silent toast to his absolute delusion, and took a sip. The next second, the heavy brass-studded oak doors at the back of the ballroom burst open. A squad of federal agents in windbreakers emblazoned with large yellow FBI letters stormed in. The lead agent strode right past my table, heading straight for Trent's. Trenton Lawson, you are under arrest for wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and money laundering. Jasmine dropped her designer purse, sobbing hysterically as she collapsed to her knees on the floor. Malik tried to make a run for it. He bolted toward the kitchen doors, but tactical agents swiftly apprehended him, tackling him to the hardwood floor, twisting his arms behind his back and locking them in handcuffs. Warren stood frozen at the podium, his hands still gripping the microphone. The fake empire he had spent his entire life building was now violently going up in flames. The entire family had completely collapsed. I stood up, the emerald gown rustled softly. I walked to the podium, staring directly into Warren's bloodshot eyes and Brenda's pale face. You spent 35 years saying, I was the failure of the family, simply because I refused to play by your rules. I said, my voice smooth but colder than ice. I jerked my chin toward Trent and Malik as they were being dragged away in handcuffs. Look at your precious golden children now. I turned on my heel and walked away. Boundless liberation flooded my body. I stepped out of the country club. A sleek black Maybach glided up to pick me up. As I stepped into the car, the phone in my purse buzzed. An encrypted text from my CFO, the merger just closed. You just made another $20 million. I did not smile. That was just the inevitable result of my unshakable competence. I slipped on my Tom Ford sunglasses, blocking out all the light and every distraction from the outside world. Home, I ordered the driver. The greatest lesson here is that you cannot heal in the environment that broke you. True power does not stem from biological obligations or maintaining an empty, fake facade. Instead, it is forged through unyielding independence, ironclad boundaries, and the absolute courage to walk away from toxic relationships. Blood may connect you, but it never gives anyone the right to siphon off your true success. When you stop playing their game, you take back total control over the narrative of your own life. Have you ever had to draw a hard line with toxic relatives? Share your story below and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more empowering stories of absolute resilience. Appendix 1. In-depth analysis of Camille's financial intelligence and forensic auditing strategy. This section provides in-depth context, thoroughly explaining the techniques Camille used to dismantle her family, tailored for an audience fascinated by the sophistication of professional finance. 1. The true nature of forensic accounting. Many people mistakenly believe auditing is merely a boring desk job, adding and subtracting numbers on an Excel spreadsheet. But forensic accounting at Camille's level is a true art of intelligence. It is a combination of elite detective skills, knowledge of international financial law, and a highly acute ability to understand criminal psychology. When Camille reviews a financial report, she does not just see lifeless numbers. She sees hidden stories, core weaknesses, and most importantly lies camouflaged under a legal guise. Camille built her firm from scratch, focusing on tracing dissipated assets in billionaire divorces, transnational corporate embezzlements, and sophisticated money laundering networks. When you are accustomed to tracking hundreds of millions of dollars flowing through shell companies in the Cayman Islands or Switzerland, seeing through the low-level financial tricks of a country pastor like Warren or a mid-tier fund manager like Trent is just like a morning warm-up exercise. 2. The long game technique. The biggest difference between an amateur and an intelligence professional is patience. Ordinary people, when hurt, often tend to react immediately. They scream, they argue, they throw things, or they cry demanding justice. But Camille understood that immediate outrage is a wasted resource. 7 years ago, when discovering that Warren had stolen $100,000 from her tuition fund to finance Jasmine's wedding, Camille did not speak up at all. If she confronted him right then, Warren would simply deny it, throw a smokescreen, or play the victim in front of the entire family and church board members. Jasmine would say that Camille was merely jealous of her happiness. Thieves will always find a way to rationalize their actions if they are cornered when unprepared. Instead, Camille chose the long game. She silently collected all the undeniable legal evidence: transaction records, routing numbers, physical authorization signatures. She digitized them, encrypted them, and stored them in an absolutely secure server. She knew that the receipt was not just evidence of a theft, it was a ticking time bomb. By waiting for 7 years, Camille allowed Jasmine to build her entire social identity and elite reputation on the foundation of that wedding. The higher the climb, the harder the fall. The bomb was detonated at the exact moment Jasmine felt the safest and the most arrogant, creating irreversible devastation. Ib's silence for 7 years was not cowardice, it was the loading of a sniper rifle. 3. Reverse manipulation using shell corporation tactics. Camille's most ruthless and brilliant tactic was how she handled Warren's real estate debt. Warren was a megalomaniac, a man who believed he was chosen by God, a misunderstood brilliant businessman. He overly leveraged the church's assets to invest in high-risk commercial real estate projects, an action not only financially stupid but also constituting federal fraud. When the market turned its back, and Warren stood on the verge of bankruptcy, he thought he was rescued by an anonymous investment fund. This was a classic example of a fake white knight technique in corporate finance. Camille used the corporate anonymity layers in Delaware, a state famous for its strict corporate privacy laws, to establish an untraceable legal entity. Through this entity, she bought up all of Warren's toxic debts. Why did she do that? Not because she wanted to save him, but because she understood that absolute power in the capitalist world does not lie in how much money you have in your wallet, but in whose debt papers you hold. When you are the creditor of a debtor who cannot pay, you own that person. Camille turned her biological father into an unpaid laborer on his own property. She forced him to comply with draconian payment terms, squeezed his cash flow dry, and turned his life into a continuous financial nightmare, while he naively believed he was dealing with an anonymous conglomerate in a distant state. The irony came from the fact that Warren still lived in a luxurious mansion, drove an expensive Lexus, and maintained the facade of a successful man. But in reality, he was merely a person renting his own illusion, and the lesser was the very daughter he always despised. By hiding her face, Camille completely eliminated the emotional factors and familial manipulation that Warren usually used. When dealing with an invisible conglomerate, Warren could not cry, could not recall his child-rearing merits, could not use the authority of a father. He could only follow the rules of the loan agreement. 4. Using the SEC and FBI as peripheral tools, an incredibly valuable detail in Camille's strategy was how she destroyed Trent, the arrogant brother-in-law. Trent was the epitome of mediocre white male overconfidence. He worked in the wealth management industry, but he himself lacked the discipline to build real wealth. He chose the path of internal embezzlement. Camille did not attack Trent by her own hands. Instead, she utilized the power of state regulatory agencies, the SEC, U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, and law enforcement agencies, the FBI. By leveraging her role as an independent auditor hired by Trent's firm to clean up the mess, Camille had legal and unlimited access to all the data systems of that investment fund. Camille's action was extremely subtle. She did not need to fabricate or plant any evidence. Men like Trent always leave loose trails themselves because they are too arrogant and believe they will never be caught. Camille simply needed to scan through the digital ledgers, find the secondary shell company Trent used to wire money for a yacht, and then package this evidence into a flawless report delivered straight to the board of directors of Trent's firm. This way, Camille kept her hands completely clean. She was a professional fulfilling her exact professional duties. Trent being handcuffed and dragged out of the building by the FBI was merely an objective consequence, strictly complying with the law. Trent could not blame Camille for destroying him. Camille was simply the one who turned on the lights, so everyone could see the cockroaches running on the floor. 5. The asymmetric response principle. Camille's overall strategy throughout that fateful evening was based on a military and financial concept called asymmetric response. That is, when an opponent attacks you with one resource, for example, mob pressure, public humiliation, emotional manipulation, you do not counterattack with a similar resource. You counterattack with a weapon in a completely different dimension for which the opponent has no defense. When Warren and Jasmine used the 36-person party to create herd pressure to force Camille to pay, a normal person would try to argue back or explain. That is a symmetric reaction, but Camille chose an asymmetric reaction. She did not argue back a single word. She used the power of capital and ownership. She did not debate with the gluttons at the banquet table. She gave orders to the restaurant manager, because she was the very person who owned that commercial property. Similarly, when Jasmine attacked Camille with a crying video on social media, attacking via mass media, Camille did not make another video to justify herself. She used core financial data, bank ledgers, to threaten to strip away Jasmine's right to participate in the upper class. When the opponent uses a fake reputation, use the notarized truth to smash it. Camille's ruthlessness lay in her absolute composure. She never raised her voice, she never blinked. She had designed an automated punishment system, where the very sins of her family, greed, fraud, vanity, became the noose strangling them. Camille did not need to pull the trigger, she simply refused to pay for their mistakes, and let the power of the law and financial reality crush them. Appendix 2. Psychological Analysis of Narcissists in the Washington Family. To understand the madness in the Washington family's behavior on the night at Laura restaurant, we need to dissect the psychological structure behind these toxic relationships. This is not simply a bad family, this is a narcissistic ecosystem maintained for decades, in which each member plays a specific role to maintain the illusion of grandeur and cover up their core emptiness. 1. The grandiose narcissist. Father Aaron Watch is not just a terrible father, he was the archetype of a grandiose narcissist. He craved power, attention, and absolute admiration from the people around him. The position of elder in the church was not a spiritual calling for him. It was a stage for him to perform his superiority. The clearest manifestation of this narcissism was that he always considered his children as narcissistic extensions of his ego. He did not view Camille as an independent individual with distinct needs and feelings. He viewed her as a resource. When she made money and successfully built a PR and auditing firm, he was not proud of her. He simply thought, her assets are my assets, her success is created by me. That is why he could calmly drain $100,000 from Camille's tuition fund without feeling any guilt. In his distorted mind, sacrificing the future of one daughter to buy face for the family, through the lavish wedding of the other daughter, was a perfectly reasonable decision. He believed that the rules applying to ordinary people, such as not stealing money from children, not borrowing money through fraud, did not apply to him because he considered himself a special individual, entitled to privileges beyond the limits of law and morality. 2. The enabling and manipulative mother. The enabler and covert narcissist. Brenda played the role of the enabler and also carried traits of a covert narcissist. While Warren screamed and gave orders, Brenda used weakness, tears, and guilt as weapons. When everything began to collapse at the restaurant, Brenda did not ask Warren to stop his abusive behavior at all. She texted Camille, using a guilt trip to force Camille to return. Aunt Denise is sobbing over there. How could you do this to your parents? Brenda was the perfect weaver for the veil covering up Warren's abuse. She always used phrases like, family must take care of each other, or it is God's will, to rationalize the financial drain. For Brenda, maintaining the image of a perfect family in front of friends in the church was far more important than the true happiness or mental safety of her own daughter. She would rather let Camille be crushed under the weight of an $500 bill than face the shame of not having enough money to pay for her fake elite facade. 3. The golden child. Jasmine was the golden child in the narcissistic family's classification system. From a young age, she had been chosen to become the representative of Warren and Brenda's perfect illusions. She did not need to work hard, did not need to take responsibility, and never had to hear the word no. The $80,000 wedding, funded by stolen money, was the clearest proof that Jasmine was always given absolute priority. The consequence of growing up as a golden child was that Jasmine became a completely hollow, vain woman lacking basic empathy. She evaluated her self-worth through the number of followers on social media, the brand of the handbag she was carrying, and the approval of her upper-class friends. When Camille left the restaurant, Jasmine did not see any wrongdoing. Her first reflex was to make a crying video to play the victim and seek attention from social media. However, the position of the golden child was an incredibly precarious one. It was built entirely on dependence upon the parents' illusion. When Camille exposed the fact that Jasmine's wedding was funded by stolen money, Jasmine's collapse was the most catastrophic. She understood that without that glamorous shell, she was absolutely nothing in the eyes of her upper-class friends. She panicked and fell to her knees because her entire personal identity had been wiped out by just a single bank ledger. 4. The irresponsible, impulsive, the scapegoat. Lost child. Malik, the gambling-addicted brother, played a role that was a blend of the secondary scapegoat and the lost child. He was damaged by the family system, but chose to cope by escaping reality through gambling and underground debts. Even though he caused trouble, Warren and Brenda continued to enable and shield him from severe legal consequences until the FBI showed up. Malik represented the waste and moral corruption that were allowed to exist as long as he never challenged Warren's authority. 5. The scapegoat turned mastermind. Finally, we have Camille. In this family structure, Camille was branded with the role of the scapegoat from the very beginning. She was the one who saw the truth, the one who refused to submit to their delusions, and therefore, she was punished. Making her pay rent on her 18th birthday, while the others spent lavishly, was not a lesson in discipline. It was a punishment because she dared to be an independent individual. But narcissistic families often make a fatal mistake regarding the scapegoat. By pushing the scapegoat to the fringes and forcing them to fend for themselves so early, they inadvertently forged within that person a strength, resilience, and sharpness that the golden children could never possess. The scapegoat learns to see through the lies because they have had to endure them their entire life. The scapegoat learns financial independence because they know no one will save them. Camille did not merely escape the scapegoat role, she weaponized it into her superpower. Her forensic accounting skills were not just a profession, they were the materialization of her lifelong need to seek the truth amidst her family's endless lies. And when she returned to confront them, she did not return as a wounded daughter seeking validation. She returned like a god of thunder, wielding the truth, financial statements, and absolute retribution. She proved that when the scapegoat stops crying and starts calculating, the entire narcissistic empire will crumble to ash. Appendix 3. The Art of Toxic Boundary Setting, and the Silent Departure. Camille's journey from a young girl drained by her family into a ruthless, invulnerable businesswoman is a paramount example of the art of setting boundaries in toxic relationships. In society, we are often taught that familial love is unconditional, that blood must always be forgiven. However, when a family functions not as a support system but as a syndicate of emotional and financial exploitation, setting boundaries is not merely a right but an absolute requirement for survival. 1. The myth of reconciliation. The greatest weakness that victims of toxic families often fall prey to is hoping for reconciliation. They believe that if they are more successful, if they earn more money, if they behave better, then one day their parents will change and love them genuinely. Camille also had a brief moment of weakness upon hearing Brenda's tear-soaked voicemail. However, Camille's difference was that she did not let that hope cloud the vigilant rationality of an auditor. The brutal reality that Camille quickly realized at Laura was this: narcissistic families never seek reconciliation. They only seek submission and renewed access to your resources. The dinner invitation was not a peaceful olive branch, it was a carefully laid trap to assess how her compliance had changed after 5 years, and most importantly, to exploit her credit card. Recognizing this truth coldly without sugarcoating it was the first step in erecting barbed wire around herself. 2. Ironclad boundaries and destructive silence. Many believe that setting boundaries means having to confront directly, having to argue, or having to convince others to respect them. That is a grave mistake when dealing with manipulators. When you argue with them, you are providing them with the very thing they crave most: emotional reactivity. Camille established her boundaries through absolute silence. When Warren ordered her to pay the Adel's $500 bill, she did not complain, did not scream, did not cry. She simply delivered a calm directive to the manager and then departed. When Jasmine posted the smear video, she did not retaliate with an explanatory video. She sent an email containing undeniable financial evidence. When Trent called to threaten her, she did not raise her voice or show fear. She simply listed the federal crimes he was committing and told him to look out the window. Silence is not weakness. When utilized purposefully, silence is the ultimate weapon that strips the manipulator of all their power. By not reacting, Camille refused to participate in the game they had rigged. She completely altered the rules from family conflict to corporate-level financial crisis management. 3. Emotional detachment. Camille's true power lay in her ability to emotionally detach herself from the people who shared her bloodline. To accomplish this, one must undergo an incredibly profound grieving process, mourning the reality that they never had, and will never have, an unconditionally loving father and mother. Once that grieving process concludes, liberation arrives. Camille viewed Warren and Brenda not as sacred creators, but as two grown adults engaging in extortion and manipulation. Eradicating the titles of father, mother, and sister from the evaluation equation allowed her to judge their actions with supreme objectivity. If a stranger demanded, "You pay Adels $500 for their meal," you would call the police. If a business partner stole $100,000 from you, you would sue them. Camille applied that exact logical standard to her own family. Emotional detachment was the most impenetrable shield against Brenda's guilt trips and subtle manipulative tactics. 4. Narrative control. A critical aspect of maintaining power is controlling the narrative. Narcissists like Jasmine and Warren are exceptionally skilled at playing the victim and smearing those who refuse to obey them. They constantly attempt to paint a picture where they are the wounded angels, while the other is the selfish, cruel villain. Camille controlled the narrative not by arguing on social media, but by wielding the facts and legal evidence. When Jasmine attempted to craft a false narrative through a tearful video, Camille instantly crushed it by threatening to release the bank ledger evidence. Evidence holds no emotion, no bias, and cannot be disputed. When you hold the unshakable truth in your hands, you do not need to try to convince anyone. You only need to show them the consequences of their continued lies. Life is too short to spend time healing wounds continuously inflicted by the very people supposed to protect you. Camille's silent stride out of Laura, and finally her step into the Maybach following the FBI raid, was a formidable declaration. Never negotiate with emotional terrorists, and never apologize for protecting yourself. 5. The existential crisis of complacency. Another utterly fascinating aspect of this confrontation was the absolute cognitive collapse of the Washington family. For decades, they had lived within an echo chamber of complacency. Warren was revered in the church, Jasmine was praised in social circles, Trent was highly regarded in the financial sector. They deluded one another into believing they were elite, untouchable individuals. They suffered from a psychological syndrome, common among those accustomed to living off exploitation, privilege, blindness. They were so used to draining Camille's blood that they never realized how massively powerful an entity she had evolved into. They still saw her as the frightened, easily bullied 18-year-old girl. The fact that Camille did not flaunt her wealth, she only silently built her financial empire from the shadows, was a lethal maneuver. Arrogance blinded the Washington family, causing them to stride confidently right into the trap. When Warren ordered her to hand over the credit card, he had absolutely no idea that he himself was paying rent to her every month. Their downfall was 100 times more agonizing precisely because they plummeted from an invisible peak conjured by their own imagination. 6. The final lesson for the survivors. Camille's vengeance was not destructive revenge. She committed no assault, leveled no slander, and executed no illegal actions whatsoever. Her vengeance was constructive revenge. She simply restored the universe's order of justice by stripping away the life preserver her family had stolen from her. When Trent was arrested, it was the consequence of his own embezzlement. When Jasmine was forced to delete the video, it was the consequence of living off stolen money. When Warren was stripped of his power, it was the consequence of reckless financial leverage. Camille was merely the one who stepped up to ensure that the law of karma was executed thoroughly and without mercy. That is the greatest lesson for anyone who has ever been suffocated by a toxic family. You do not need to become a villain to win, you simply need to stop acting as the shield for their disastrous consequences. Step aside, withdraw your financial and emotional support, and let the sheer weight of their own lies crush them. In the chessboard of life, the greatest power is not speaking the loudest, nor crying the most tragically. The greatest power is calmly watching the opponent back themselves into a checkmate, and then quietly locking the door and walking away toward your own bright, impenetrable future, where toxic people can never set foot. 7. Building an empire. The difference between money and power. Many in the Washington family, especially Trent and Warren, confuse two concepts, money and power. Trent made a lot of money from his base salary and commissions, though he still had to steal more to maintain the facade. But he had no power. He was merely a mid-level employee, replaceable at any moment, and when the FBI showed up, he was utterly crushed. His money was only used to buy inanimate objects like yachts or Rolex watches. Camille, conversely, pursued power. Money to her was merely a tool to purchase power. When she founded her forensic accounting firm, she did not just seek lucrative contracts. She sought access to information. In the modern business world, information is the most precious asset. The ability to see through financial statements, the capability to possess tax records, and the skill to trace the scent of dirty money granted her colossal leverage over high-status individuals in society. Her acquisition of Warren's debt through a shell company was the supreme manifestation of power. Power does not need to be loud. Power does not need to scream across a dinner table. Power is simply the fact that you can press a buttons on a keyboard and turn an arrogant man into a homeless vagrant within 48 hours. By thoroughly understanding the difference between money and power, Camille constructed an impenetrable fortress for herself. 8. The epilogue of true maturity. Camille's story is not merely a tale of vengeance, it is a manifesto of maturity. True maturity does not mean you must accept every abuse in the name of familial affection. True maturity is the ability to perceive people precisely for who they are, rather than who you wish they were. The Washington family had countless opportunities to change, to rectify their mistakes, to genuinely love the daughter they had pushed to the edge. But they refused. They chose vanity, greed, and superficial power. Therefore, the punishment they endured was absolutely not inflicted by Camille. It was the inevitable consequence of what their own hands had sown and cultivated over decades. As the Maybach glided through the Atlanta night, returning Camille to her secure, gated penthouse, she carried no regrets. She left behind a legacy of lies burning fiercely. She taught us this: when you confront the ghosts of the past, sometimes the only way to win is to never look back. Just keep marching forward, keep building your empire, and let the cold, merciless truth do the rest. Have you ever had to draw a hard boundary with toxic relatives? Share your story below, and do not forget to subscribe to the channel to tune in for empowering stories of absolute resilience. Thank you for listening.